All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started since I have 1 o'clock. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Gabriella Garrison. I am the Eastern Piedmont Habitat Conservation Coordinator for the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission, and I'm also the coordinator for this pollinator group that is bringing you this webinar today, the North Carolina Pollinator Conservation Alliance. So before we get started with Sarina's talk, let me go over a few basic housekeeping rules that I think most people have seen over the last year and a half. Microphones have been muted upon entry. If you have unmuted yourself, please mute yourself again. And also please turn off your camera to minimize any distraction during our presentation. There is going to be time for questions after the presentation has ended. So if during Sarina's talk you do have any questions, please type them in the chat box and we will address them at the end of her presentation. And then at the end of the webinar, while we're doing questions, Sarina is going to have a contact information slide so you can copy that down and follow up with her afterwards if you have any other questions. And then lastly, we are recording this webinar and we are going to put it on our YouTube channel within the next week or so, hopefully before that. So just a quick little note about our group. We are about 3 years old, and we are a partnership of 27 agencies and organizations across the state with all common interest in pollinator outreach and conservation, specifically in North Carolina. So it's been this really neat organization of people that want to get out outreach into the community and answer questions and do presentations like this. So we do have 6 committees in our partnership. They are plant resources, outreach, habitat assessment, research, energy, and pesticide stewardship. And like I mentioned before, our outreach committee is responsible for bringing you this webinar today. And if you have any suggestions of webinars that you would like to see in the future, please do let me know. You can drop me a question in the chat because we're always interested to try to meet the needs of our community as far as questions they have regarding pollinator enhancement, bee ID, butterflies, anything that has to do with pollinator conservation. So we do have a website here at ncpollinatoralliance.org. We're also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. These are some of our partners. You can see we have a pretty wide assortment of local government, state and federal government, nonprofit organizations, private organizations, and universities. And then lastly, jot these dates down if you'd like. We are going to have 2 more webinars in October and November. On October 7th, we're going to have Annabelle Renwick with us. She's the curator at Sarah P. Duke Gardens, and she's going to talk to us about fall planting for pollinators, all the different kinds of native plants that you can use and that you can plant. And then on November 4th, we're going to have Dr. Casey Raymond from UNCG, and she's going to talk about the research she's done looking at the effect of glyphosate on honeybees. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sarina. Let me stop sharing. And while she is loading her slides, let me give you a little bit of background information on her. Sarina graduated from UNC Charlotte with a BS in biology in 2018. And while attending UNC Charlotte, she volunteered with the UNCC Botanical Gardens and developed a love for horticulture. She has interned at Highlands Biological Station in Highlands, North Carolina, as well as Longwood Gardens in Kennett Square, Pennsylvania. After interning at Longwood Gardens, Sarina moved home to Cabarrus County and now works full-time as a public garden manager at Hurley Park in Salisbury. Sarina currently serves as the president of the Concord Wildlife Alliance chapter of the North Carolina Wildlife Federation, an organization that she has volunteered with since she's been in college. So thank you so much, Sarina, for joining us today, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Gabriella, for that introduction. Can you see my screen okay and everything looks good? Okay, thank you. And thank you guys for letting me come speak today. I'm excited to be joining you from Hurley Park here in Salisbury. We are a park that is part of the city. So I work for the City of Salisbury, and we are open dawn to dusk every single day of the week. So if you're ever in the area, feel free to check us out. So today we'll be talking about fall garden cleanup, and these are some things that I do at the park. I'm definitely not an expert on everything related to fall garden cleanup, but these are some things I've learned over the past couple years and I'm excited to share them with you today. So feel free to, as we're going through the slides, if you want to take photos of the slides, that's totally fine with me. But as Gabriella said, they are recording this and we'll have it on their YouTube, so you can watch it there again as well. This is not exactly what the garden looks like right now. We have asters blooming in this photo, so that'll be later in the fall, but you can tell that gardening for wildlife is not always the most organized garden in the world, but that's a good thing. So as we go along, you'll see some different photos, and if you have any questions, feel free to drop those in the chat and I will answer them at the end. So we'll get started. This is what Hurley Park looks like right now. So a lot of our fall wildflowers are finishing up. BlackEyed Susans are going to seed and the purple cone flowers are going to seed. And then in the photo on the right, we have some verbena that's not looking its best. And then we have standing tall above those are some swamp sunflowers that will bloom later in the fall for our late season pollinators. So I could get out there and take the weed whacker and cut them all down and make it look very tidy for the winter. But that would defeat the purpose of feeding all of these pollinators all summer long, because we would only be supporting them for about half of their life cycles. They're around during the winter, we just don't see them, but by managing our garden responsibly, we can support them all year round, even in the winter and the late fall. So where are these pollinators at exactly? They can be lots of different places. So in the bullet points, I kind of focused on bees, but it relates to pollinators as a whole. So we have ground nesting bees, and that's actually a majority of our native bees. Like in this photo from Cornell, they dig little burrows into the ground and either stay in there or lay their eggs in there for the winter. We have other bees that are stem nesting bees, and those are really important to support with our fall garden cleanup as well. We have cavity nesting bees and then wood nesting bees like our carpenter or carpenter bees. So in some of these photos you can see I did include one that I found of a polyphemus or silk moth in my hand right there. That was actually found in a wildflower patch that was hanging on from the previous fall, and I could see where the moth itself actually came out in the spring. So by thinking about where these pollinators live, it can give us a clue as to how to best clean up our gardens. So thinking about if we could support pollinators in the ground through stems, through creating habitat with wood or habitat for wood or cavity bees, it can help us guide ourselves on our fall cleanup. So a statement that's pretty ubiquitous in today's pollinator focused landscapes is leaving the leaves, but it's not really talked about that much about why we would want to do this. So I hope I can help you explain and maybe help you explain to your neighbors or HOA or friends why you choose to leave the leaves. So first of all, it's free mulch and free fertilizer. So a lot of people will clean up these leaves from their grass, which is good because it does kill grass if you leave a thick layer of leaves on there. But you can reuse those by putting them around your trees or shrubs or even on top of your garden beds. And it will, as they break down, it'll add fertilizer to your garden beds, and it will also have some mulch for the winter, so maybe you can avoid some of the winter weeds. The leaves are creating habitat, and not just habitat for pollinators. It's for all forms of wildlife. I included some small photos here of the different types of wildlife that you may find in your leaves, or even if you don't see them, they are sticking around because you're leaving the leaves somewhere in your landscape. These include millipedes, salamanders and other lizards, spiders, our beautiful Luna moths. That's one that's always a big topic because they're so beautiful and large. We want to have them on our landscapes, and one of their places that they overwinter is in the leaves. So if we're shredding up the leaves or hauling off the leaves, you're basically hauling off all of these critters that would prefer to live there in the winter. And that includes some types of fireflies. They actually live in the moist ground as grubs before they are fireflies. And some of them prefer moist leaf habitats. So even if you just have a leaf pile tucked away in your woods, you're supporting all of these different things in your garden. In addition to that, if we think about our bird friends that hang around here in the winter, we don't see any caterpillars in the winter, and neither do they. So
I really wanted yours
you
for the sound.
are leaving the leaves, if you're leaving the leaves, it gives the birds something to forage through and look for all these small critters when their food is scarce in the winter. So we're going to leave the leaves, but we also want to leave the stems. So it's not possible for many people to leave all of the stems. I definitely don't leave every single stem in the park, but if I do have to remove them, I will do something like is in these two photos. So I really try to focus on hollow stems. That's what cavity nesting insects are looking for, and stem nesting insects. When you save these stems, you can make a bundle. In the photo in the middle, I just bundled up the hollow stems, tied them with a piece of twine, and I stuck them into an evergreen holly. That gives it a little protection from the elements and also still allows it to be around in case some cavity nesting or stem nesting insects are looking for a place for the winter. The photo on the right is actually from the North Carolina Botanical Garden. I thought this was a wonderful idea, and I think people could definitely incorporate this into their garden as a kind of an art form. It's called a bee wattle. They have a little description here on the sign, which is really important to let people know what it is and what it's for. And I think it's great that they included this. So what they do is they take the stems from their older plants when they clean up in the fall, and they just stick them into this bee wattle. So they're allowed to stay there forever until they disintegrate and go away. But they just continue to add to it. And so I think it creates a good element in your garden and also create some habitat for different types of insects. So a couple tips on this is that you can vary the heights from 8 to 24 inches. So if you don't like them super tall, you can cut them shorter. But I will say it's recommended that you leave these stems for 2 full growing seasons. So you could leave them really tall in the winter and then you could cut them down in the spring. But it's better if you could leave them for 2 full growing seasons to make sure everybody has hatched and gotten out of there, because different insects need different times. Another benefit to doing that is that it gives the perennials, as they're coming back, it kind of gives them a structure to lean upon. So it can help support your wildflowers that tend to flop over if you're leaving these stems. So I mentioned hollow stem plants are what they're mostly looking for. And a couple of these examples are things that you may mow down or cut down at the end of the year, like blackberries or elderberries. Those are the 2 pictures on the left. Those are really common on the roadsides and in fields and things like that. So if you have a field that you're managing and you can leave these hollow stems for the pollinators, I'm sure they would appreciate that. In the picture in the middle is a beautiful Joe Pyeweed in bloom. I know mine is about to finish up now, but I will leave it out there. If you, it's really interesting to cut them and look at them because they are very hollow and they're a beautiful addition to your landscape in general. And then if you can leave them in the winter, that's all the better. The 2 on the right, so the one on the bottom is a goldenrod, and there's different types of wasps that are really specific to different goldenrods, and they actually form a gall on the goldenrods. So if you're in a field like this one and you see a big like ball on them, you know that a wasp or potentially some other type of insect is in there and has laid their eggs. And then at the top is our swamp sunflower. You can see it blooms later in the fall. There's not that many leaves left on the trees, but they are beautiful and I just kind of let them go wild. So native grasses are becoming really popular, which I'm glad for. You can find them in a lot of different garden centers now. They're the larval host for many butterflies and moths. So you're supporting the pollinators as they are eating and growing for the next generation. But then you can also leave those native grasses for the winter, and they provide an overwintering habitat for bumblebees and other different small critters, even like mice and things like that. The native grasses also produce a seed, and the birds do eat those seeds. So all different types of wildlife are benefiting from these native grasses. And the picture on the right is obviously not a native grass, but it is a grass that we have at the park. And a lot of people have this in their home landscape, and it's not the worst plant in the world, because it does have this clumping bunching form similar to native grasses. And so if you leave this structure during the fall and winter, you are still supporting those bees and insects that do take shelter there, and as well as birds that use this material for nests. In addition, all of the native grasses and even these ornamental grasses are beautiful in the winter if you're looking at it through a landscape aspect. They give some motion and structure to a fall garden that may have perennials or annuals that have died off. I will mention the picture on the top is a little blue stem grass that I added to my garden this year. So it's still a baby, but you can tell it's already getting those beautiful colors. So little blue stem, and then the one on the bottom is pink muley grass, which is really popular, and I see it a lot more places now. Grasses also have a fibrous kind of root, so they can help in areas that you may need erosion control. So using native grasses has many, many benefits, and not just for pollinators, but for all types of wildlife. And the same goes for grasses as it does for stems and leaves, that if you're going to remove these materials from your landscape, it's best to wait until the spring when it's warm. So usually when it's above 50 degrees consistently, or you see pollinators that are active, you can cut these grasses down and tidy them up. But if you don't do that, they're perfectly fine as well. They'll just come back and the old material will kind of fall back into the landscape. So we talked about stems, leaves, and native grasses, but there are other overwintering habitats. So something I do at the park is tuck away if I have to cut stems or sticks or even logs. I will tuck those back into the woods where they're not very visible, which I imagine many people can do at their homes, and just make like a stick pile that I'm not composting with this. It's just a stick pile that would, happen in nature. And it gives some overwintering habitat for all types of animals. So we have like invertebrates, birds will perch here, they could hunt here, they could forage here. And then smaller like amphibians, frogs, small mammals, and even ground nesting bees would like this habitat for the ground nesting bees, if the ground is clear, they would like that. But just making a stick pile gives somewhere for these animals to hide from predators and hide from the cold. And then the picture on the right is a stump. So I think this is something that's becoming more accepted in our gardening culture, is leaving stumps and other logs around for all types of invertebrates and even our like carpenter bees. And it's a good thing to do if you have the space. And if not, I would consider, if you have to have a tree removed or a limb cut down, consider building one of these stick piles in a more hidden space, or even creating a space in your yard that is designated as somewhere that you want to create this type of habitat. So with all of those things in mind, I think the biggest thing to, stepping back and not doing as much fall garden cleanup is, how do you keep it looking clean? So what I do at the park is focus on the edges and the pathways. So this time of the year, I'm definitely making sure that the beds have a very clear edge, And so that can be accomplished through an edger or a weed eater and just making sure that they have definition. And that helps them, even if the black-eyed Susans and everything else is looking pretty crazy, if they have an edge, it looks like someone is really taking care of this garden and keeping it clean. The picture on the right is another example of how to do like an edge and a pathway. So the pathway is pretty straight itself. It keeps a consistent form. And then the edge of the pathway is actually trimmed back about a foot to keep it looking clean. So you don't have things hanging over into your pathway. You have a straight shot along there. So these things can be implemented in your home garden. The next bullet point is heading back, and I don't have a great photo of this because I'm trialing it out on the swamp sunflowers this year. Back in June, I cut them down by about a third, and that is to hopefully help them not be so tall and flop over. And so we'll see if that works this fall. The photo on the left down there is a picture of some cone flowers, and I know many people's cone flowers look like this right now, and it can be a daunting task to deal with. The best thing to do if you want to leave the stems and leave the seed heads, you can take one of those square tomato cages and just pull. You need someone to help you, but if you have someone hold all of those stems up and you put the cage around it, usually that will hold them up, as long as you don't have too many. And if you don't want to do that, I would recommend cutting these off for the year and doing the stem bundle, putting it in a protected location, like I mentioned, and then the next year, adding some plants around it to kind of help hold them up. So something that's a little bit stronger to help hold these purple coneflowers up. So we talked about different things to clean up, but then something that's fun in the fall when it gets cooler is to start mulching. I love mulch. I think mulch looks great. There's nothing like a fresh layer of mulch to help your garden look very neat and tidy. Something that's great about mulch is it will help suppress weeds. So if you're able to get out there early in the fall and mulch, it will suppress weeds, and it can help overwinter your marginally hardy plants. These are two things that you can do with leaf mulch as well, or even compost. It doesn't have to just be hardwood mulch. A con to mulching in the fall is that the leaves will fall and cover your nice fresh mulch. So all of your work may actually just get covered up by leaves, depending on where your garden is located. And mulch can negatively impact ground nesting bees. So a solution to that is to consider mulching only the front and visible areas of your gardens to allow that bare ground, like up near maybe the foundation of your house or something like that, to attract ground nesting bees. We'll talk a little bit more about this in the next slide, but I kind of wanted to touch on, do you mulch in the fall or do you not mulch? And I think adding mulch to your garden, especially compost or leaf mulch, is great to do in the fall. So I definitely wanted to touch on ground nesting bees because they make up the majority of our native bee species. And I think that they don't get enough attention, especially with, like-minded people who are trying to manage their gardens for our pollinators and other native wildlife. So as I said, the majority of our native bees are ground nesting bees, and they pop up in, I feel like people mostly see them on turf grass areas that don't look great. So like in these photos, that kind of looks like a turf area where the grass is very sparse. And that's what they like. They want an area like this that gets a lot of sun, that's warm and dry and like compacted soil. So it's kind of a win-win because they don't want our garden areas. That's not their preferred habitat. And they're not harming the ground. They're actually helping the ground with their little tunnels. They're aerating the soil. And they're not like yellow jackets. So when I talk about ground nesting bees, that's not yellow jackets. One way you can tell that is that usually these ground nesting bees are not active for a very long time. They're up for a couple weeks and they mate and lay their eggs, and then they're done. So if you see bees like flying in and out of holes constantly, it's probably not them. It may be yellow jackets or some other type of bug. And another complaint I get, so these are mostly solitary bees, and they, but if there's an area that they really like, you may get a lot of them in that area. So it looks like there's a colony of them or a colony of ants or some other type of critter. But if you can poke one of these and no red ants come out at you, they're not fire ants. And if you do not see a lot of them hovering consistently, it is probably not yellow jackets. And yellow jackets only have one entrance to their hole as well. And so if you see a grouping of them, it's probably ground nesting bees. So if you have an area in your yard that is, like I described, like a warm, dry area with sun exposure and poor soil, you could consider adding a rock mulch to an already bare ground area. So it's important to not add anything like wheat barrier or plastic or newspaper before you put these rocks down, because that defeats the purpose. And if it's an area that gets a lot of irrigation from sprinklers or something else, then the ground nesting bees may not like it, but you may still consider adding a rock mulch. Doing this is not going to make them just show up the next day and move right in, but it may encourage them. If they see that you have this space, they may come by or they may not. But either way, the rock mulch looks great, especially in an area where it's hard to grow grass or an area with really poor soil that, you know, plants just don't want to be. So in the figure here, you can see it's not, you're not making like a flat layer of rocks, no space. You want to kind of just leave some space around. I couldn't find a photo of this, but I know that at the Chatham County Extension Office, Debbie Roos has an area like this with some bigger rocks, and it's a really great space, especially because she, it was a really tough space for her to grow plants, and she just added the rock mulch instead. So I wanted to throw that out there for those of us thinking about ground nesting bees. And something to keep in mind, we're talking about leaving all these leaves and sticks and stems. So traditionally HOAs and other groups don't love this. They think it looks messy, and it does if you're not in the mindset of providing nesting habitat for pollinators. So a really big thing that you can do that's not very hard is just add some signs. There are so many great resources out there, like the Butterfly Highway with the North Carolina Wildlife Federation. It's free to register your pollinator garden with the Butterfly Highway. And then if you want to, you can purchase one of their signs and add it to your garden. There's also all different types of signage. You can get a very aesthetically friendly one from Etsy that doesn't give much information, but it does let people know that you are maintaining your garden and your space, but it's pollinator friendly. And then the one on the right is just a free printable sign that you can print out on some nice paper, laminate, and stick out there to let people know that you are trying to support pollinators with your space. Something else that I think a lot of us may think about in the fall is, looking back on your year of gardening, thinking what did well, what didn't do well. And if you're guessing, you may try a soil test that could help you narrow down your guesses. So these are free until November through the North Carolina Cooperative Extension. You just go by the extension office, your local. There's an extension office in every county, so they're pretty easy to find. They will give you a little cardboard box. You fill that out, fill it up with some soil. They have instructions on how to properly do this for your yard or your garden space. Take it back to the extension office, and they will send it to the soil lab at NC State. When the test results come back, it can be a little confusing and a little bit technical but your local extension office is really great at explaining it and trying to help you figure out what you need to add to your soil to help your plants or your grass. So definitely consider doing this if you've never done it before. It helps pollinators, it helps wildlife, and we're not adding things to our soil that we don't actually need. You're not running out to buy a bag of lime and just throwing it out there and hoping for the best. And they'll tell you exactly what you need for your soil through your soil test. Another great fall gardening task is to clean out your bird boxes and your bird feeders. So this is something that I think a lot of us overlook, or we just don't think about or talk about enough, is that these bird boxes should be cleaned out pretty regularly. And then it's recommended to clean out your bird feeders every 2 weeks. Not to worry if you haven't done this, but we can start doing it. So for the bird boxes, you should definitely wear gloves when cleaning them out, because there can be bacteria and mites and things like that that you don't want. So cleaning out an old nesting material will make it more attractive to any new residents. And then you can clean that with 1 part bleach to 9 parts water, which I think we're all familiar with after our COVID worries. But you can also do the same thing for your bird feeders. So cleaning those with 1 part bleach to 9 parts water. It's recommended every 2 weeks, but if you haven't done that and you're thinking about putting your bird feeders out soon, then definitely do this before you put them out, or just when they get emptied, take them down and do this. When you're cleaning both of these things, make sure that they completely dry before you close them back up and put them out, just to eliminate any mildew or mold that may grow. If we think about our bird feeders, that is a very high risk area for our birds. They all different types of birds from all different places. They may be migrating through, they may be residents. They're all coming together at this one area. And as we know, if we all get together in big groups, things can spread. So just make sure that we are doing this to eliminate any parasites or bacteria that may transmit between our different birds. Another thing that is great to do in the fall when you're cleaning up your fall garden is collecting seeds. So I don't recommend collecting seeds from things that are rare or endangered, but if you have a friend that has a milkweed patch and you want to start some milkweed, this is a great time to think about it and think about what you want to do in your garden next year. So one of our board members for Hurley Park collected this swamp milkweed from her farm and gave it to me last fall. So I cleaned off the seeds and I stuck them in our fridge. I left them in there until the spring. I got them out, put them in some pots, and I just planted them out at the park last week. So a whole year transpired before I was able to have plants, but autumn or fall is the best time to do this planning for the whole next year, especially if you're wanting to collect native seeds. So many of them do require that stratification period of different types of stratification for all different types of things, but many of the wildflowers will be perfectly happy to come up in the spring if you just stick them in your fridge for the fall and winter, and then get them out in the summer after the frost. That way you can be sure that no birds are coming along and digging them up, or squirrels or anything else. There's really no chance of anything bad happening to them when they're in your fridge for the winter. The picture on the left is to remind me to tell you about a good way to collect seeds. So I know many of us, if you've ever bought jewelry from a small business or even a large business, they like to put things in these little jewelry bags, which I never reuse. Well, I never used to reuse, but now I do. They're great because you can tie them shut, and they're not exactly like cloth material, so they dry well. And if you see something that's about to go to seed, but it's not exactly ripe yet, and you want to collect these seeds, you can stick this bag on there, tie it shut, and it will collect your seeds for you passively. In addition to, if you would like to collect seeds, just really small seeds that are hard to get out, like bee balm or our native cardinal flower. Those are very tiny seeds, and collecting them in this mesh bag makes it a little bit easier. So I think I talked about a lot of things in my presentation, but I'll just summarize them here. I think a great way to do fall garden cleanup is trying to mimic natural habitat. So if you're ever wondering, what you should do with leaves or stems or logs, think about what would happen to those things out in nature, out on a prairie or out in the forest, and then trying to mimic that in your own yard. Mulching where necessary, so at the fronts of beds or just in places that are high visibility, and then leaving the rest for other critters to find their own home in. Getting a soil test done from April to November and utilizing your local extension office. They can also help you identify plants and figure out what may go well in your garden. If you don't get the soil test done before November, you can still get it done. It just costs $4 per sample. So it's not outrageous, but it is free from April to November. And then signage and outreach helps. So if you're able to even do a very simple sign in your garden and explain why you're leaving all of these things, that helps. It helps spread the word about managing for pollinators, and it also helps people understand what you're doing with your garden. Cleaning out bird boxes and feeders is a great fall task. So since we're not doing as many tasks cleaning up leaves and stems and logs, we can spend more time cleaning our bird boxes and feeders. And then the other thing that is good to keep in mind for the fall is to make sure to collect and stratify any seeds that you're wanting to propagate for the spring. So here's my contact information. Feel free to send me an email, any questions you have, or if you have questions about the park, I'm happy to answer those as well. And then I also have a Facebook and Instagram page for the park that I post, what's going on, and I post different articles and things like that. So if you are on Facebook or Instagram, be sure to give us a follow. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarina. That was great. There was a lot of really good information that you gave to us just now. So if you have a question, please take a minute and drop it in the chat box, and we can ask Sarina for her input on that. There is one question already. Bill would like to know if the hollow stem bundles are primarily for insect winter protection, or can they be placed before the mating season concludes?
You can place them anytime that if you have to cut down stems, you can make a stem bundle. But it definitely is primarily for their winter protection.
Yep, I just add too, a lot of the guidance that we give is to leave the stem standing over winter and then cut them back in early spring, and then leave a stubble on the ground. So, anywhere between 8 inches to 12 inches. And so then the bees in the spring can start using that stubble as potential breeding sites. Any other questions? Oh, there's another one. So Sarina, when leaving bare spots for ground nesting bees, does the exposure matter? Should those bare spots be in sun, shade, etc.?
Oh, I'm sorry, I should have said. So they like sunny areas. So they like a warm, dry location. If you are walking around, I notice them a lot, like in greenway spaces, because usually they're not maintaining the grass there. So there may be bare patches, and I usually see a lot of these ground nesting bees in areas like that. So sun.
Yep. I actually have a question too. So when folks are walking through your garden, especially this time of year and in the winter, and they see the way that you've left it, that kind of habitat, do you get a lot of questions? I know you have signage, but do you get questions regardless? Because if you do, I'm wondering, what sort of a condensed answer that you give people that maybe some of our listeners could say to some of their neighbors, or if they're in an HOA and they get a lot of question or pushback about that, what are some things that they could say to their HOA or somebody that's giving them a hard time?
Yeah, so I do get questions a lot if I leave things around. We've kind of tackled this because we write some articles for the paper and kind of explain what we're doing, and we share it on our social media pages. But I know for homeowners that may not always be the best way. But if you have an HOA page, like I know some homeowner associations do Facebook groups, so you could share information in there that way. But a condensed answer, I guess, would be that, I clean up anything that is like laying down on the ground. So then that's when I will make like a stem bundle, because we are a park and I want people to walk there and feel comfortable, not have to wade through brush. But if there's stuff that's just standing up in a garden bed, I explain to people, pollinators use this as habitat to overwinter. And usually if they stand there long enough, you will see some birds coming to eat some of the seeds. So I use that as a talking point as well, to say, we have all these birds that live here all winter, and they need stuff to eat. So rather than me running to the home goods store to buy bird seed, I just leave this here for them to eat during the winter.
Yeah, and Sarina, just to mention too, we're having a lot of issues here lately with different diseases, and there's been alerts put out to take your bird feeders down in the spring and here more recently. And so a lot of the response that we tend to give is, if you plant native and if you have a more welcoming yard, then that really reduces the need to have those feeders up, because they can get food from your yard. And so, like Sarina just pointed out, having those standing stems where they can get seeds is a great way for them to get food and not have to go to the feeders, and then there's grouping and spread of disease and that kind of thing. So lots of questions. Okay, another question. Do you have suggestions for keeping fall leaves in place in garden beds? I left the leaves last year and inevitably they blew into my neighbor's yard.
I don't really have a great solution to that. If it's dry, they're going to blow around. If they're wet, they're going to stay more in place. So maybe, if you can bundle them up like thicker in some areas, and they may hold more moisture and not be as likely to blow around. But yeah, their leaves, they like to blow around.
Yeah, and maybe that kind of adds into the whole issue of education and outreach, and letting your neighbors know why leaves are a good thing. So maybe easier said than done, but still always the effort. Yes. Okay, so another question from Lisa. She said this is a newbie question, but Lisa, seed stratification is complicated for a lot more than just newbie people, so don't feel bad. She was wondering if you could give a quick, high-level, non-scientist overview of what seed stratification is, and if it's necessary, and what is its purpose?
Yeah, that's a great question. So seed stratification is just, let's see. It kind of just like tells the seed to wake up. So there's all different types of stratification. Like some things want like a bird to eat it and it go through the bird's digestive system and break it down a little bit, break down the seed coating a little bit, and then it will germinate. And it's very complicated. Different seeds want all different types of things, but many of our wildflowers want like a cold stratification. So they want a certain number of days under a certain temperature, which your fridge is pretty chilly, so it'll like that. And then it will then like inside of the seed, it tells it like it's time to germinate, it's spring. So yeah, it just depends on the different types of seeds. There's lots of resources online where you can figure out exactly what a seed needs. And not all of them need it, which you can tell that like some things will just germinate as soon as the seed falls off, they don't care. But others are a little more tricky. And I have found, just like in my personal experiments, that milkweed does a lot better if it is cold stratified. And for milkweed, like I said, I just stick it in the fridge and get it out in the spring when I'm starting all the other seeds for my garden. So I guess that's just a quick answer. If you want me to go into more detail, I can.
Well, hopefully that answered your question. And I was going to say too, tune in to our webinar next month on October 7th with Annabelle. She is the curator at Duke Gardens, and I think she's going to delve into that quite a bit more. She's going to talk about fall planting, and I suspect she'll talk about seed stratification and collecting seeds as well. And then, so we had a few comments relative to the question about the leaves blowing around. Diane says, if you chop your leaves, they're less likely to blow around. So that's a suggestion. And then Jane says to try wetting the leaves with a hose every once in a while, which I think, Sarina, you mentioned too. All right. So Ellen is wondering, do you bundle all seed producing flowers such as Black-Eyed Susans and leave them available for winter birds as you demonstrated with the coneflower?
Yes, I will. Especially because I feel like leaving them out. If I don't bundle them, I will at least like make a little pile of them for anybody, you know, birds or whoever to use. But I will say, the Black-Eyed Susans and the Brown-Eyed Susans will take over your garden space. So if you don't want that, you can definitely just collect the seeds and share with a friend. If you visit Hurley Park, you will see that our Black-Eyed Susans are very happy. They're everywhere, which we did not plant them. They have just moved themselves around. So if you don't want that, I would not bundle them up and let the birds eat them in your yard. You can share them with a friend and let them eat them in their yard.
All right, great answer. So Marina is asking, she says, we had a lot of ladybugs, caterpillars, and birds in the overgrown front yard garden. According to their life cycle, is there ever a good time to cut the weeds down?
So if you're talking about specifically like known garden weeds, I definitely just try to get them cut down before they go to seed. So things that are persistent and not native, like Creeping Charlie, or I'm blanking on a lot of common names, but like Persica and things like that, I definitely try to get those down or cut down or removed before they're flowering and going to seed. But as far as like, so the ladybugs and the caterpillars, they should be finishing up their, you know, life cycle in the fall. So if you're worried about those, just a general fall garden cleanup of different weeds or things that you don't want in your garden would be fine for them.
Okay. Would milkweed seeds stratify naturally in the ground or on the ground through a North Carolina winter?
Yes. So I guess I should mention this, and that's a great question. So I'm glad someone asked that. If you just leave your milkweed seeds out in a pot, anything could happen to them. So a dog could run by and knock it over, and you have no idea where your seeds went. Or, you know, a bird could come by, dig them up, or a squirrel or anything. So you can just like, and a lot of people do seed in the winter, especially for our native plants. They will overseed in the winter with them, but you are running the risk of having wildlife eat your seeds. If you're doing a seed mix and you have tons of seeds, that may not be a concern of yours. But if you're like really wanting to have this plant and know that it will propagate, you can stratify them in your fridge and then plant them in the spring, or even you could even plant them in the fall and just put them in a more protected location. If you wanted to create a little box that squirrels can't dig into, that's a great way. Or putting them in a basement or another space that stays pretty cold is another way to stratify them kind of naturally, but without the impact of wildlife on them.
So Diane just said that there is a winter sowing group where people share their seeds and then you put it in milk jugs for winter stratifying. She says she did it for the first time last winter and it really worked. So Diane, maybe if you want to drop some contact information in there, or somebody that can, or if somebody wants to reach out to somebody to get more information, you can let them know. I'll give everybody just another minute or so to ask any last minute questions of Sarina. And while you're thinking of any more questions or typing them in, I'll just add this. So we do get a lot of questions from folks about this idea, because this is really what we promote, having this leaving the leaves, having a messy fall garden, just kicking back and not doing yard work so that the wildlife can enjoy your winter garden so they have that habitat. It's so important. But we get a lot of pushback from HOAs and folks that have this very outdated idea of what a yard is supposed to look like. So come September, they want to cut everything flush to the ground and get rid of all the leaves, and that's so detrimental. So if you're in a situation like that, please reach out to me. I'm going to drop my contact information in the chat because we can do, especially in this era of video conferencing. I just did one 2 weeks ago. I did a presentation for an HOA talking about a lot of these ideas that Sarina just talked about how important it is to do it, why we should do it. And I think that that kind of one-on-one interface might be helpful in getting folks to understand, because I think they just don't know a lot of the time. So if that's something that you think would be appealing or helpful for you in your situation, then like I said, please let me know. I'm going to put my information in the chat box right now. And please don't hesitate to reach out to me if we can do some kind of virtual presentation like that for your HOA or any kind of neighborhood association where you're having a lot of trouble with keeping your yard messy for our wildlife. And honestly, I don't even like saying messy because I love how it looks in the fall, but that's how it looks to a lot of people, messy. So Diane just said that the group is on Facebook and it's called Winter Sowing. So I don't see any more questions. I just want to say a big thank you again to Sarina. Thank you so much for talking to us today and sharing all these things that you do at Hurley Park. If you are in the neighborhood of in Salisbury, please stop by and check out Hurley Park and say hi to Sarina. And thanks so much for joining us today. Like I said at the beginning, in October, we're going to have a webinar with Annabelle Renwick, and she's going to be talking about things that you can plant, native plants for your garden in the fall. And then in November, we're going to talk with Dr. Raymond about the effect of glyphosate, which is Roundup, on honeybees. So thank you so much, everybody. Have a great afternoon. Appreciate it.